Hey guys, my name's Kirby. I'm a senior in AM design, and I decided to do studio photography for my Zenith project originally, but with COVID and quarantine and everything, my plans got changed a little bit. It's kind of hard to do studio photography when you don't have access to a studio or to models, so that was a little bit of a bust. But with a lot of emailing back and forth with Miss P, I decided to switch my project to food photography, which I had dabbled in before. I actually did it for my junior explorations project. I did a single spread of a cookbook, but I decided to upscale that to almost a full-blown cookbook at this point. I started by doing some more research, really delving into how you're supposed to lay out and place food when you photograph it. I had done a little bit of research in the past, but I really dived into it. And once I figured out some of the rules, I started looking on Pinterest, creating mood boards, just to get some inspiration for what I actually wanted to do. And it was really nice. I had probably over 200 pins saved across different boards, being like, oh, I want to try this. I want to use this technique. Once I had all of those ideas, I started cooking and baking just to experiment. And I really spent some time on my first shot just trying to figure out what lighting techniques I wanted to use. I originally started with a 2-light setup, key and a fill, and I struggled a lot with it. I don't have the largest of kitchens or spaces just to take photos. And if you don't know anything about strobes, they're very powerful flashes. And in food photography, you want to shoot very wide open between f1.8 and f4. And to try and do that and have two 800-watt flashes go off, you're almost 100% of the time going to be blowing out your subject. So due to space and the power of the strobes, I decided to only do a monolight setup for most of my photographs, sometimes bring a speed light in on slave mode for my fill, and also use some natural light. It worked out pretty well, but another problem arose with the strobes being so powerful. I was 90% of the time blowing out my subject just because of space requirements and everything. So I actually had bought some ND gels for the previous project, the studio photography, just so I could try and sculpt the light a little bit. And I used those to stop down my strobe by a lot. I had 4 ND gels cutting out about 2 stops of light total, and all the baffling in a softbox, and the strobes turned all the way down, and I was finally able to get good photos. So I kind of took that and ran with it. I photographed probably around 25 to 27 dishes, just so I'd have some variety to choose from, because not every single one of them turned out amazingly. And it worked out pretty well. I did a lot of food layout and just placement, just making the dishes look pretty, basically. And then taking photographs, some top down, some front on or profile. Once I had taken all those photographs, I took all of the raw photos, brought them into Lightroom. I probably had around 5,000 raw photos. Whoops. Trying to cut down 5,000 photos into like 25 finals is very hard. It involves a lot of rating scales and flagging yes or no. I went through about 3 rounds, getting them down to about 2 to 3 shots per item. And then I edited those fully in Photoshop and Lightroom first, and then brought them into Photoshop if I noticed any large imperfections. So it was a pretty close to an hour or two on each photo, just really dialing it in. Once I had gotten all my finals done, I decided to start working on my cookbook layout in InDesign. And it went pretty well, I'd say. I spent a lot of time laying it out, the first spread, and that's something I really strive to do. Just design one spread first instead of trying to figure out my design concept over 20 spreads. So I went through about 25 distinctly different design concepts for my first spread before settling on the one I currently am at. Once I had that concept, I continued to design the rest of the spreads along the same lines, and it worked out pretty well. Once I had finished designing all my spreads, I separated them out into categories and separated the categories out by color, just to add a little bit more emphasis on the different categories. Once I had finished all the categories and the page numbers and everything, I decided to do the flaps with a pattern design, and I took my family's plates that we made as kids and made those into a repeating pattern. And I just thought it was a really nice homey aspect, because all of the recipes in the book are ones that my family or our close relatives have come up with. So it just brought that personal aspect to the cookbook. Throughout this process, I really learned a lot about myself. I'm a perfectionist. I normally have 25 different final versions of a file, all with different names, being like, oh, this is the final one. And I tried to avoid that on this project just because it's not a very good design practice, and it wasn't helpful. So when doing it, I decided to say, you know what? Okay, this is good. It looks good. It doesn't need anything more. I can still see a couple minor imperfections in my final design, but nothing that anybody else could notice. So I ended up being very happy with it without having to drive myself insane over those tiny details, which was very nice. Throughout this project, I wasn't able to collaborate with any other freestylers, obviously, because, coronavirus, love that. But I was really able to collaborate with my family. They helped me a lot making the dishes, advising me on layout of the food. And my true partner in crime was my older sister, Audrey. She is a former freestyler, and she went through the program, so she knows what it's like. And she really helped me, because without her, I probably wouldn't have been able to make half the dishes, just due to time restraint. She was normally cooking while I was photographing, and then she would advise me on some layout if I did something, and she's like, why do you do it like this? We'd really play off of each other's strengths. And because of that, I was able to make the best product possible, which you're about to see. Yeah.